Now this is very rare, isn't it? This is on the inside of the Sun, Scum, page 7. And it says that Brenda is selling cannabis drink. And it says cannabis-infused drink is flying off shelves at the Queen's Farm shop. Trip is made from a marijuana compound and features a V peace sign on the front of the 2.19 pence cans. Infused with 15 milligram of cannabidiol, CBD, the 250 milligram 21 calorie drinks come in peach and ginger flavor or elderflower and mint. Fans looking to chill out are buying in bulk at the shop near Windsor Castle. Now this is ridiculous. But this is the kind of exclusive exposes on Brenda that they are quite happy to run. And of course, the main plug is for this. This is the kind of, it's like the number of votes they are counting for Boris Johnson, the unfit Boris Johnson. She'll be talking and this Times today, Saturday the 23rd of January 2021, also runs the main headline, new variant of the virus more deadly. And this is the Times of Saturday, the 23rd of January 2021. And as we said in the first part, in which we gave the summaries of the racist behavior by Sarah Veal, Zia Trent, Marina Salandi Brown, and then reporter called Abrams, either connected with the Reuters news agency or the Press Association during the period January to March 1992. That was not about Crossrail. I think that was about the campaign against the racists involved in the Stratford school dispute. So that's one correction about the date and the subject or the context or the reference to the reason for the communications between myself and this woman called Abrams. And let's see what the other fact check produces about the Treaty of Rome. I said I'd check and correct the year, either it's 1950 or 51. So it is Treaty of Rome is most likely dated in The first Treaty of Rome must have been in 1950. But this is the one. So where are the dates? It's not the Treaty of Rome or EEC Treaty, officially the treaty establishing the European Economic Community, brought about the creation of the European Economic Community, the best known of the European communities. The treaty was signed on 25th of March 1957 by Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. And it came into force on the 1st of January 1958. So this is the month. Under the name Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, it remains one of the most important treaties in what is now the European Union. So where is the Treaty of Rome that is related to the establishment of the Human Rights Convention? I'll come to that. And the reason I'm doing that is, of course, to do with the state of the UK, sort of post-Brexit. So let's see when this ECHR, European Convention on Human Rights, was established. So that's the one. That is the 1950 European Convention on Human Rights. It was signed on the 4th of November 1950. And the location was Rome, and effective from the 3rd of September 1953. And the parties that signed at the time numbered 47 Council of Europe member states. And languages are French and English. Okay, so the history. The European Convention on Human Rights has played, yes, the European Convention on Human Rights, formerly the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. That's the one that was signed in 1950 in Rome. It was the Treaty of Rome, but it was not the Treaty of Rome in the formal naming title of it, as this entry on Wikipedia shows. And I think the reason why I mentioned in part A the Treaty of Rome, this one, the one that is now known as the Convention, European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, which is stated here as being formally known or formally known as the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. It's described here as an international convention to protect human rights and political freedoms in Europe, drafted in 1950 by the then newly formed Council of Europe. The convention entered into force on the 3rd of September 1953. All Council of Europe member states are party to the convention, and new members are expected to ratify the convention at the earliest opportunity. And the convention established the European Court of Human Rights, also referred to by the same initials as the convention, ECHR. Any person who feels their rights have been violated under the convention by a state party can take a case to the court. Judgments finding violations are binding on the states concerned and are obliged to execute them. The Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe monitors the execution of judgments, particularly to ensure payment of the amounts awarded by the court to the applicants in compensation for the damage they have sustained. The convention has several protocols which amend the convention framework. The convention has had a significant influence on the law in Council of Europe member countries and is widely considered the most effective international treaty for human rights protection. Now, this is the one that I was referring to about the housing human rights and the kind of departure from the housing market capitalism by signatory states, including the UK at the time. And so therefore the convention articles, this is the list of convention articles. And the Article 1 is respecting rights. Article 2, life. Article 3, torture. Article 3, servitude. Article 3, torture. Article 4, servitude. That is against servitude and against torture. Article 5, liberty and security. Article 6, fair trial. Article 7, retroactivity. And Article 8, privacy. Article 9, conscience and religion. Article 10, expression. Article 11, association. Article 12, marriage. And Article 13, effective remedy. Article 14, discrimination. Article 15, derogations. Article 16, foreign parties. Article 17, abuse of rights. And Article 18, permitted restrictions. And then there are convention protocols. There are several protocols that are listed in short. And Protocol 1 has got Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. Now, Protocol 14111, Article 1 is about property. Let's look at the property one because it's about the housing and property and so on. So let's see. Article 2 provides for the right not to be denied. Article 1, A1P1 provides that every natural or legal person is entitled to the peaceful enjoyment of his possessions. The European Court of Human Rights acknowledged a violation of fair balance between the demands of the general interest of the community and the requirements of the protection of the individual's fundamental rights, also in the uncertainty for the owner about the future of the property and in the absence of an allowance. And this is where we shall come to the attack on the kitten's house. As of January 2010, 15 protocols to the convention have been opened for signature. So these can be divided into two main groups. Those amending the framework of the convention system and those expanding the rights that can be protected. The former require unanimous ratification by member states before coming into force, and while the latter require a certain number of states to sign before coming into force. This protocol, that is convention protocols and protocol number 1, the protocol contains 3 different rights which the signatories could not agree to place in the convention itself. Monaco and Switzerland have signed but never ratified the protocol. Article 1 provides that every natural or legal person is entitled to the peaceful enjoyment of his possessions. Now, let's see what that explains. Right to property. The right to property or right to own property is often classified as a human right for natural persons regarding their possessions. A general recognition of a right to private property is found more rarely and is typically heavily constrained insofar as property is owned by legal persons, that is, corporations, and where it is used for production rather than consumption. A right to property is recognized in Article 17 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it is not recognized in the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights or the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The European Convention on Human Rights, in Protocol 1, Article 1, acknowledges a right for natural and legal persons to peaceful enjoyment of their possessions, subject to the general interest or to secure the payment of taxes. The right to property is one of the most controversial human rights, but essentially it is a human right as well. And we shall be talking more about this in the course of the diagnosis of Fleet Street, because in the references to housing, in the references to the lack of housing, in the references to homelessness and the particular context of the rights of the homeless people to be protected from exposure to the virus, a lot of references have been made to the ban on evictions by the Conservatives fronted by Boris Johnson cabal as the government of the UK at the time of the virus affecting the UK. So the ban on evictions has been inadequately referred to and mentioned, and by certain campaign groups that came into existence or came into relative prominence during the appearance of the virus, have been found to be refusing to refusing to assert and advocate and back the housing human rights on the part of the affected people and on the part of everyone concerned. And housing human rights, they're saying that it's controversial. It is bound to be controversial because housing has been mainly used as a market by the successive governments in the UK, and also by the corrupt judicial bureaucracies, which are geared to perpetuating the market ideology of society and to perpetrate the denial of basic universal rights to the people, universal human rights to housing on the part of the degenerators, the people who own the properties, and the Conservative Party. And therefore, they have been in breach, or they have been in intentional breach, or in intentional negligence of the requirements of the 1950 Convention that the housing human rights is part of, and the UK is a signatory to. So the signatory status of the United Kingdom has become obviously subject to the alterations as based on the so-called Brexit deal or agreement with the European Union. And we shall examine the actual current state of the status of the United Kingdom in relation to the housing human rights and the human rights protocols and the behavior of the criminals who carried out the attacks on the Kitten's house in August 2012 in collaboration with and being aided and abetted and solicited and incited and engaged by the criminals, including those bearded Muslims, in position at the time as members of the committee of the SSBA, which did its business via the SSBA Community Trust. Those criminals, the record and the evidence of their behavior, including the harassment of the kittens, all the evidence was made known to the police, as well as to the listed number of registered charities, including in particular, the Royal Society, RSPCA. RSPCA meaning Royal Society for the Protection or the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So these facts were made known to the London Metropolitan Police, as well as to the Crown Prosecution Service, where the Director of Public Prosecution in post at the time was Keir Starmer. Neither Starmer nor the other branches of the CPS, which is the police and the Crown Prosecution Service general bureaucracy, followed up the communications. So they didn't recognize the urgency of need to protect the animals from the attacks. Quite in addition to that list of failures, the right given in the article, the right to property, right to enjoy property without interference, was also violated, and the police and the CPS and the DPP failed to take any action. And the fact we have said in the piece yesterday, or in the part A yesterday, that is Friday, the 22nd of January 2021, was part of and has been part of the evidence of willful, wrongful, unlawful, illegal refusal by the agencies and the institutes and institutions and employees in paid posts and paid by the state to do what they were failing to do, or what they were choosing not to do, what they were neglecting to do. The harassment of the kittens by this woman called Stephanie MacDonald was done in front of a number of people, including two bearded men, one of whom at that time was in post as a member of the committee of the Spitalfield Small Business Association as a registered company, registered with Companies House. And his name appears on the list of committee members as committee members, meaning as director. And it was that individual member that carried out a series of intentional criminal lying and false communications in order to mislead the, if you like, defenders of the archives as well as the Kitchen's House, mislead them into believing that the attack that was about to be mounted physically was not going to be mounted. There was no plan to attack. So this bearded member of the committee was a known liar who had intended to mislead and tell lies and to do that on behalf of his co-criminals as members on the board. And this liar, this criminal, knew the magnitude of the damage that would be done if the attack were to be carried out. So we shall come to identifying and listing the various damage and harm and detriment that were caused, because the details of those are quite extensive and would take space and take time to list and articulate and mention and state. Going back to the plan, the knowledge on the part of the protectors of the archives and the Kitchen's House that an attack was imminent, and in compliance with the principle of due process, principle of legality, they approached the imminent attack as a part of a multifaceted kind of targeting an attack by a group of criminals. And as to the purpose, we shall come to the purpose at the very end, either at the end of this one, which is unlikely, or at the end of the detailed description part of the diagnosis, and we shall be giving those details in that. Now, a woman called Carol Crawford, was among the paid perpetrators of the attack, because Crawford hired 4 or 5 criminals as her agents to carry out the attack as part of the contract she had with the Spitalfield Small Business Association, also known as the SSBA Community Trust. Now, Carol Crawford lied, as did her hired agents, all of them white men, either in their late 20s or in their 30s. And those criminals carried out the attack over several weeks. In August 2012, the bearded man, who was a member of the committee of the Spitalfield Small Business Association, was engaged by Stephanie McDonald and Rhoda Braun to make a number of apparently urgent telephone communications alleging or pretending that a conversation by the owners of the archives and the protectors of the Kitchen's House and the protectors of the kittens might avoid an attack if they had a meeting with the criminal, adulteress, liar, Stephanie McDonald. And that took place on a Friday, which in 2012 was the first day of the month of Ramadan. And the bearded committeeman otherwise claimed to be a devout Muslim. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is a liar who played the key part in making strategically intended diversions and false and misleading statements in order to facilitate the preparation of the attack on the kitten's house. And this criminal liar did his lying solely in order to benefit himself as an agent, as a stooge, and as a reward for his stoogery and corrupt collusion with the criminal adulteress, Stephanie McDonald, to get a job security that he would not otherwise have within the Spitalfield Small Business Association at that time. So in a series of communications, this criminal made reassuring statements saying that a meeting with Stephanie McDonald would avert the attack that was being planned. He said he knew the attack was going to happen. Now, this is Saturday, the 23rd of January, 2021. And we're talking about July 2012. So July 2012 and today, how long is it? It's 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 9 years. 9 years ago. 9 years ago, on the first day of the Ramadan, this liar gave more importance to the arrangement and the conspiracy and the plot being prepared by the criminals identifiable as Stephanie McDonald, because she was the one that they gave the order or the go ahead to engage the other criminals. And at the meeting that took place, this criminal, Stephanie McDonald, the racist, adulterous criminal, made a series of, quote, reassurances, which she uttered and she perpetrated as part of the steps that she and her co-criminals would take in order to deflect and divert the focus of the defenders of the kitchen's house and the owners of the archives. But those are all being noticed, what they were doing, and the lies that she was caught telling were pointed out to her and her co-criminal called Aziz Chaudhry. The lies were told to them, or noted to them, or communicated to them, or mentioned to them, and cited to them that they had been lying. The fact that all of this was done and yet the criminals did not stop will be discussed in due course, but that was the fact. That a decision was made in order to protect the animals, the 3 kittens, from aggravation and attacks and the desperation and the distress. Now, all of these attacks violated the conventions. The convention, generally in this article, the right to property or right to own property is often classified as a human right for natural persons, and remember, read this one, regarding their possessions. Property is not just a building or a house, it's the possessions inside a house or inside a building or inside houses and buildings. And the property, the meaning of property can be further contextually legally in the sense of the kind of proceedings in a court that can be mentioned, can be found in the judgment by the High Court judge who ruled against the London Borough of Southwark Council. And the ruling was published on the 14th of October 2014. And the case is known as, let's see, so this is the one that it's AA versus London Borough of Southwark, this, and it was a ruling by His Honor Judge Anthony Thornton, QC, sitting as a deputy judge of the High Court. And the ruling was published or dated the 14th of October 2014, as I've said in the past, not today, but in previous publications and comments. I got hold of the ruling on the same day while I was having a coffee in a coffee place in Southwark itself, not far from the Tower Bridge. Sorry. Was it the Tower Bridge? I think the Tower Bridge is the one the nearest to the place where I was sitting. And that was the same date I sent a copy of that one or a link to that one to the Tower Hamlets Council legal section by email. And I annotated, I highlighted, and I especially emphasized the various factors of similarity between the attack on the properties and possessions of the claimant AA by a group of criminals employed as Southwark Council's employees. That was a similar thing. That was 14th of October 2014, and the date when the archives were attacked by Tower Hamlets Community Housing was sometime in September 2011. And the September 2011 attacks on the archives by the criminals in the Tower Hamlets community housing took place not in Brick Lane but at an address in London E2 7AA. And the facts of the attacks before they happened in September 2011 had been made known to a number of councillors in Tower Hamlets Council and also to Lutfur Rahman, Rabina Khan, Alibor Chaudhry, amongst others. Now, Lutfur Rahman was in place as the incumbent so-called mayor in the corrupt post of the elected mayor. But he was in that post, despite the fact that it was a corrupt post, and I personally didn't agree with the post being there, and I still am not in any shape or form accepting the fact that any such post should exist. I made the communications to Lutfur Rahman directly via text and also via text and emails through Alibor Chaudhry and also by emails to the so-called mayor's office in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. And the mayor's office had been sent items about the imminence of the attack on the properties at the address in E27AA in September 2011. Those items were also sent to Rabina Khan. Rabina Khan was in place as the member for the cabinet of Lutfur Rahman, allegedly at the expense of housing rights and housing services and duties that Tower Hamlets Council owed to members of the community concerned. Now, all the evidence that was sent to Lutfur Rahman, Alibor Chaudhry, and Rabina Khan included this. I'm coming to the finding. I'm going to trace one of them. So this one, for example, dated the 16th of September 2011. It says, second test transmission, testing email addresses for Alibor Chaudhry and now that of Councillor Rabina Khan and copying in Lutfur Rahman. Following this transmission is the set of emails that constitutes the last leg of the final representations that David Galpin, the head of Tower Hamlets Council's legal, requested in his email on Friday, the 9th of September 2011. The items follow in the next transmission. And it reads that the 16th of September 2011, third transmission for Alibor Chaudhry and now Councillor Rabina Khan and copying in Lutfur Rahman. The items follow in the next transmission, and the items read as follows. 13:30 hours, Wednesday, 14th of September 2011. Part 2 of the evidence that exposes as shallow and irrelevant and oppressive David Galpin's repeated assertion that it was Mr. Huck who somehow failed to appeal or failed to provide the information. That cannot happen, because Mr. Huck has been and had been and remains the most prolific, consistent communicator on all aspects of their activities. So part 2 of the evidence that exposes as shallow and irrelevant and oppressive David Galpin's repeated assertion. Here is the most recent list of the sources of borrowings that Mr. Hawk began supplying to Mr. Steve Hill in November 2010. Now, in that list, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 names of sources of the funding. Loans, remember? And the names are not being mentioned here because some of the people may be exposed to unintended legal interference if the names are mentioned at this time. But let's read the rest of it. And there are about 5, 6 other items, names of individuals or names of businesses. And this one is dated the 16th of September 2011. And it is from Alibor Chaudhry, who says at 02:11 hours in the morning of 16th of September 2011. Thank you, brother. And that was sent from his email, by his email address, from his email address, from his iPhone. And his email address, and it was in acknowledging the item that had been sent earlier, which I read earlier. And at 10:44 on 16th of September 2011, headline, very urgent deadline queries, asking one or more than one of Councillor Alibor, Councillor Rabina, and Mr. Lutfur Rahman to call the mobile contact number which was given there as soon as possible to confirm what has been going on, as based on the conversations Mr. Lutfur Rahman had last night with Mr. Haq. That is, last night meaning the evening of September 15th, 2011, about all these attacks. And at 10:54, an email was sent to Lutfur Rahman as the mayor at towerhamlets.gov.uk, and 4 more. 4 more meaning Alibor Chaudhry, Councillor Khalesuddin Ahmad, Rabina Khan, and a member of the public in the community connected at that time with Lutfur Rahman, and it was a member of the organization called Clifton Group. So what I'm referring to is a representative sample of the very hectic and intense communications that were sent to Tower Hamlets Council and addressing Lutfur Rahman himself, Alibor Chaudhry, and Rabina Khan as part of the legal, constitutional, evidential, moral, and ethical action to stop Tower Hamlets community housing from going ahead with the criminal attack on the properties. At that time, as based at the address in E27AA. Now, this is part of the original exclusive, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. No Fleet Street newspaper, mainstream, nor any broadcasting outfit or outlets would ever have published anything like this about any act of thuggery, robbery, criminality, and violations of the United Kingdom's signed up obligations under the Human Rights Convention and the articles. So we shall be coming in due course to relating to the particular articles on the breaches by Tower Hamlets Council and the Tower Hamlets community housing. In due course, we shall be doing that. But before that, let me say that the superficial basis used by Tower Hamlets community housing for the attacks was an alleged court order issued by the county court at that time, 2011, the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court. And the order was issued by the notorious racist criminal liar called Manners. It's a woman called Manners. And we have discussed Manners in a number of previous editions. And we shall be updating on Manners in due course later. So the Manners gave the order in July 2011 based on a totally false, untrue and untruthful claim of rent arrears made by the criminal Michael Crook. Michael Crook, the Michael Tyrrell, the Crook, as the employee of the gang's organization, Tower Hamlets Community Housing, as chief executive. Michael Tyrrell lied because the arrear for rent arrears was allegedly for a few £100, which wasn't the case because Tower Hamlets Community Housing owed me more than £1,500 already. So that couldn't have been a claim. And that is the reason why I told the court that they owed me money and I didn't have to attend because I had already made the full and fuller representations. So all these items will be elaborated on again in updating. Essentially, the Shoreditch and Clerkenwell County Court and this bad Manners violated the treaty obligations the UK was under according to the 1950 treaty and the article concerning the protection of natural persons' possessions and property. As I said, again, we shall be coming into detailed further elaboration on all of those factors and the facts in due course. So what is happening is that we are discussing the confession by the Brexiteers in today's papers. According to today's Fleet Street papers and today's Fleet Street based online kind of posts, that there has been so-called alleged red tape. Red tape is the expression used to generally misleadingly refer to bureaucratic delays that are caused by really individuals imposed in the bureaucracy. But that is not the truth, because the delay, as we explained in the first part of this diagnosis of Fleet Street, the delay is actually being caused by the very Brexit terms that the Brexiteers wanted. That is to say, that the Brexiteers are now saying that the additional task of completing forms and of treating British commodities, commercial exports to countries in the European Union that currently exists, as exports from one country to another country, that is wrong. Now it is defying obvious common sense. If two countries that are not part of the type of union or bloc that the EU is, but no longer applies because the UK has left the EU, then the UK must be treated as an exporter of those particular goods and commodities. And the Brexiteers are now blaming, in an anodyne way, red tape, which doesn't actually expose Brexit as the faulter, as the fault causer, as the problem causing mechanism, which is the Brexit deal. The deal that Boris Johnson and others signed with the European kind of competitors or former partners as part of the divorce. So the Brexiteers are saying that the delay is then adding significant amount of additional costs to be incurred by the British businesses as well as by the importers of British goods, importers in European countries, because the costs have to be met of the additional work, paperwork, various stages. And the Brexiteers are blaming anodyne factor like red tape, which they are separating from the actual direct involvement of the and the consequences of having Brexit. So the woman sitting as a district judge in the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court She is actually, her name is Henrietta Manners. Now, Henrietta Manners is a notorious racist and a liar. Now, Henrietta Manners has had a lifelong engagement of criminality, racistly motivated criminality, to deprive targets of her criminality of basic rights. And in the context of this particular series of events, Henrietta Manners was the judge who was involved in the Royal London hospitals, the hospital-created problem of mass evictions and mass homelessness in 1987 in New Road. So Henrietta Manners gave the order wrongly to the criminal called Paul Verma. The criminal Paul Verma lied to the then Shoreditch County Court, where Henrietta Manners was sitting for the series of hearings, by the liar Paul Verma. And Manners turned down the evidence, which is outstanding even today, nearly 30 years later. The evidence that showed that Verma had lied and Manners had lied and Manners had colluded with the lying of Verma. Now that was almost 20 years before July 2011, when Henrietta Manners sat as the judge in the newly merged Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court. And before the actual criminally racist, untruthful, and illegal order she gave in favor of Tower Hamlets community housing on the 27th of June, 2011. Henrietta Manners was sent, and the court manager was sent, all the evidence, as well as the reason for not attending, because the THCH, Tower Hamlets Community Housing criminals, had lied in the application, and there was no reason for their lie to be treated as the truth, because they owed the person they were claiming to have been in arrears. They owed more money than the sum of arrears, alleged arrear that they claimed was outstanding. So the criminal, Henrietta Manners, was told in communications that followed the order, wrong order, told the facts, and she ignored them. Now that is against the articles of 1950, and especially the articles concerning fair say and due process, and the protocol defending and protecting the possessions of a natural person. Now, the point about the natural person being the distinction between a corporate organization that is treated as a person in strictly legal kind of contents and contexts. A natural person is an ordinary human being, whether they are employed as a post holder in an organization or not is irrelevant. And so therefore, Henrietta Manners, as the district judge, serially, criminally, racistly active district judge in the Shoreditch and Clerkenwell County Courts, continued her criminal attacks and continued to violate the UK's constitutional law treaty obligations. Now, there is no way that Charles Dickens or George Orwell or any comparable kind of socially conscious writer who has ever written anything about the East End of London would have got a thousandth of the facts that we have been dealing with and engaged in dealing with and identifying and explaining and examining and diagnosing. This kind of behavior cannot be found in any book, in any newspaper reports, or any documentary, in a comparable kind of documentary factual broadcast by any radio or television program. Not in Britain, not in any other part of the world as far as we can see. If any viewer, anyone viewing this, and doing so with considerable specific dedication to facts and evidence, if they come across any instance that contradicts our statement throughout, we shall be more than willing to recognize the evidence and appropriately update or amend any part or any aspect of what we are saying. Essentially, the theme, the totality of the theme that we are following and pursuing will remain unaltered because it's not subject to any evidence being changed, because it is not possible to change the evidence of the legal framework. It is possible to change or amend the evidence in a particular case, aspect of a case, but it is not possible to change the framework, which is what remains constant in the context. So when the Sunday Times, last Sunday's Sunday Times, carried a promotion piece for Rabina Khan, bylined to a woman who has prided in her profile about having got involved in international journalism after she accidentally got invited to a wedding in Pakistan. That is a bag full of baggages for a white woman with free access to the racist status quo of mainstream journalism and so on, to have to rely on, refer to a country which is collectively maligned and demonized by her likes and her ilk. So we shall examine in detail that as well, and we shall expose that as part of a very detailed conspiracy by the racist status quo to additionally profit from the targets of their attacks and vilifications. Anyone watching this and not able to understand what we are saying because they don't have the knowledge base or the familiarity or the attention span, can communicate to us via Twitter in a direct direct message called DM. They can get to know about how to send direct message by Twitter. And the Twitter handle that is accessible for this purpose is called Kudilar. Spelling is there in the name of this program. Kudilar at yahoo.com is the email address, but the Twitter handle is Kudilar. Kudilar is, of course, after the Twitter address, twitter.com/Kudilar. And they can contact us with the evidence. And we can tell the difference between a troll and a genuine correspondent. So trolls need not try, because we are quite alert and aware of trolls. Essentially, this is a very serious program. So serious, we emphasize that it is not imitation of any other program anywhere. This is the program of its kind, one exclusive worldwide communication. And what we're doing here in saying that we are diagnosing Fleet Street, we are also diagnosing the entire rest of the world's English language newspapers that still imitate Fleet Street in many respects. Because this is the kind of bad hangover and remainder of the poisonous influence of lies by a Fleet Street. The mythology includes assumptions of inherent superiority by those who write the English newspaper, that is to say the Fleet Street or the media, or give their bylines to them, or are associated with the Fleet Street in any way. Item by item, every single item of news and event warrants being examined based entirely on the evidence of the matter, evidence of the issue, fact of the issue and fact of the matter. Not because it is blindly and stupidly imitating Fleet Street model. As I said, this is Saturday titles, including the CPGB paper. We spent more than £20 in cover price, cash. £20 we spent to give the evidence, factual evidence. Now we shall move from the violation by Tower Hamlets Council and by Lutfur Rahman and by Rabina Khan, etc., and the behavior, violating behavior of Henrietta Manners at the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court for the time being. And we shall talk about the BBC's racism. That's referred to on page 5 of today's Times newspaper, although it is owned by the dirty digger Rupert Murdoch. This is one of those items that are not exclusive to the Times. So therefore, it cannot be explained by specific reference only to Rupert Murdoch. So let's see what the literal content is saying. The BBC has rejected a complaint against Laura Koenigsberg for using the phrase nitty-gritty in the latest sign of the corporation's shift away from the so-called wokery. Remember, woke, we discussed, is a concept created by racists to describe anyone who opposes racism. So this is the headline, gives the game away. The BBC is now being seen as against wokes, that is to say, with racists. And it is saying in the piece by Matthew Moore, media correspondent, some anti-racism campaigners claim that the term is unacceptable because it had its origins in the slave trade, although etymologists say there is no convincing evidence for this assertion. After the complaint was dismissed by the program makers, it was escalated to the corporation's executive complaints unit, which is now found in Queensberg Faber, Laura Queensberg. The ruling comes as Tim Davie, Davie, seeks to challenge perceptions that the corporation's output and values became excessively woke under Lord Hall of Birkenhead, Tony Hall, his predecessor as Director General. One of Mr. Davies' first acts in the top job was to reverse the decision not to sing Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory at the last night of the proms. He has also pushed to end the dominance of left-wing comedy on BBC television and radio, and overseen strict new social media guidelines that ban staff from virtue signaling online. Nitty-gritty was included on a list of phrases to be avoided by sports commentators last summer at a diversity briefing attended by hundreds of BBC, Sky, BT Sport and ITV staff. They were told to use alternatives such as the basic facts on the grounds that the nitty-gritty is thought to have referred to the detritus found in the bottoms of transatlantic slave ships. However, linguists have expressed bafflement at this alleged etymology. The phrase first appeared in print in the 1930s, decades after the end of the transatlantic slave trade, and none of its earliest uses was connected to slavery. Its origins are generally seen as unclear. Gary Martin, a language researcher who runs the phrases.org.uk website, has investigated the expression. He said there is no evidence to support the suggestion that nitty-gritty has any connection with slave ships. It may have originated in the USA as an African-American expression, but that is as near as it gets to slavery. Queensberg's use of the phrase during a November's episode of Brexit Cast was particularly innocuous. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, for these shadow nerds like us who are fascinated by all this soap opera, she said. The BBC declined to comment on the decision not to uphold the complaint or to reveal how many listeners had lodged objections. Now, this is typical racist denial. And we shall be talking more about the nitty-gritty, Laura Queensberg, BBC Racism, Greg Dyke, and the Emily Mate Lies and others in due course, and probably later. What is happening with the actual operation? The operation of the claim that it's not Brexit. It's not Brexit deal. It's not Brexit incentives. It's not Brexit lies that can be said to be contributing in any way to the problems being faced by ordinary customers, ordinary members of the public, and ordinary businesses in Britain during January 2021. They are actually continuing the lying that Brexit was obtained by or secured by. One of the lies, of course, told by Boris Johnson was at the expense of the Muslim community, because targeting Turkey as waiting to invade Britain if Britain didn't actually vote for Brexit. That was so explosive a lie that it instantly triggered instant revulsion against the gullibles majority, against the idea of the EU that would, as the believed the liar Boris Johnson, as the EU would make it happen. That is to say, the EU would let millions of Turks invade Britain, take over the country, and alter Britain from being the Britain that it has been or had been. So that was also a lie against the treaties, because no treaty exists or could exist that made the Turks or any other country invade another country. There was no way. The maximum that a new EU member country could do is to have its citizens head for that country and settle there as ordinary people, but only in their maximum, in their thousands, not in their millions. And again, Keir Starmer, the opposition in Parliament, has failed to make anything of that big lie. And that big lie should be hammered home and hammered back in the face of Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and other Brexiteering liars. Every time they allow the lie now to be perpetrated through the same Fleet Street, that the delay, the actual consequences of Brexit being felt by customers and by increasing numbers of businesses, British businesses, these are the consequences that were inevitable in Brexit, as the Brexiteers wanted Brexit to be. So we shall be talking more about these and other issues in the later parts and in the forthcoming